There's a historical pattern that has repeated across every major civilization for the last 2,000 years. And right now, it is unfolding again. History books tell us that during the fall of Rome, the Weimar hyperinflation of 1923, or the Great Depression of 1929, everyone lost money. That is a lie. The truth is, while the masses stood in breadlines and saw their life savings turn to dust, a small, select group of elites didn't just survive. They multiplied their wealth. They bought entire companies for pennies. They acquired vast acreages of farmland for next to nothing. This wasn't luck, and it wasn't a coincidence. They followed a specific mathematical playbook consisting of 5 ancient rules that are designed to profit from the destruction of the currency. And right now, in 2026, as we stand at the end of the greatest debt supercycle in human history, that playbook is being activated again. The indicators are identical. The math doesn't lie. In this video, I am going to reveal that exact playbook. I will show you the 5 ancient rules that Roman senators, German industrialists, and American tycoons used to survive the exact scenario we face today. Because when the reset comes, history offers only 2 outcomes. You can be the liquidity for someone else, or you can be the beneficiary. Let me show you how. To understand the elite playbook, you must first unlearn everything you have been taught about a financial crash. Most people believe that during a depression, wealth is destroyed. They look at the stock market dropping 50% or their home value plummeting, and they think that value has simply vanished into a black hole. That is incorrect. The financial system operates on the same principles as the laws of physics. Specifically, the first law of thermodynamics. Energy cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be transferred or changed from one form to another. Wealth is simply a form of stored energy. When the Roman Empire collapsed, the farmland did not disappear. The aqueducts did not evaporate. The gold mines did not vanish. When the Weimar currency became worthless in 1923, the factories in Berlin were still standing. The machinery was still functional. The real estate was still there. So, where did the wealth go? It didn't disappear. It moved. It transferred from the millions of people holding paper claims currency, government bonds, and savings accounts to the few people holding real value gold, land, commodities, and productive businesses. This is the mechanism of the wealth transfer. The elite understand that a crash is not the end of the world. It is a liquidity event. It is a moment where the illusion of paper wealth is stripped away and the ownership of the world's real assets is reorganized. If you are holding paper when the music stops, you are the victim. If you are holding real assets, you are the new owner. So, stop fearing the collapse. The collapse is simply the mechanism that transfers wealth. Your only job is to position yourself on the receiving end of that transfer. But to do that, you must first understand when the transfer is about to happen. You need to see the mathematical pattern that signals the end of the cycle. And that pattern is flashing red right now. History does not repeat itself randomly. It follows a cycle. Specifically, a long-term debt cycle that peaks roughly every 80 to 100 years. This cycle is governed by a simple, brutal equation. When the debt of a nation becomes mathematically impossible to repay, the currency must die so the system can live. Let's look at the data. In the 3rd century, the Roman Empire faced unpayable military debts. They had 2 choices: austerity, which causes revolution, or debasement, which causes inflation. They chose debasement. They reduced the silver content of the denarius from 100% to less than 5%. The currency collapsed. In 1923, the Weimar Republic faced war reparations that exceeded their gross domestic product. They could not tax the people enough to pay it. So, they printed the difference. The mark went to 0. And today, in 2025, the United States has reached that exact same mathematical breaking point. The national debt has surpassed $36 trillion. For the first time in history, the interest payments on that debt are costing more than the entire national defense budget. The debt to GDP ratio is over 120%, a threshold that, historically, no empire has ever crossed without eventually defaulting or destroying its currency. We are currently in what historians call the 4th turning, the winter of the economic cycle. The government has promised more in entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, and pensions than it can ever extract in taxes. The gap is in the hundreds of trillions. The math is binary. They cannot default openly, because the entire global financial system is built on their bonds. Therefore, they must choose the Roman solution. They must choose the Weimar solution. They will inflate the debt away. They will print money until the debt becomes meaningless in real terms. This is the great reset everyone talks about. It is not a conspiracy theory. It is a balance sheet restructuring. And once you accept that the currency will be debased, the elite playbook becomes the only logical path forward. The biggest threat to your wealth in a collapse is not the market, it is the government. History proves this. On April 5th, 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. It criminalized the possession of monetary gold by any American citizen. The middle class lined up at banks to hand over their savings in exchange for paper dollars, but the elite did not. They read the fine print. Section 2B of the order contained a specific exemption for gold coins having a recognized special value to collectors. While the public surrendered their bullion, the wealthy simply converted their holdings into numismatic gold rare coins. They kept their wealth, legally, while everyone else was forced into paper currency that was immediately devalued by 40%. This brings us to rule number 1. Own unconfiscatable assets. In 2025, you must own assets that have no counterparty risk. If your wealth relies on a bank, a brokerage, or a government permission slip to access, you do not own it. You merely have a claim on it. The elite strategy today focuses on 3 specific asset classes that are invisible to the system. First, numismatic gold and silver. Just like in 1933, these are often exempt from reporting requirements and confiscation laws. Second, high-end art and collectibles. These are portable, subjective in value, and exist outside the traditional banking grid. And third, the modern equivalent of buried gold, Bitcoin, held in self-custody. Notice I said self-custody. If your crypto is on an exchange like Coinbase, it can be frozen with a single phone call. But if it is on a cold storage device, memorized as a 12-word seed phrase in your head, it becomes the first truly unseizable asset in human history. It can cross borders, it cannot be debased, and it cannot be confiscated without your consent. Rule number 1 is simple. If you can't hold it, you don't own it. But owning the asset is only the first step. You also need that asset to generate enough cash to pay the taxman without selling the asset itself. There is a common objection I hear constantly. You can never truly own land. Property taxes mean you are just renting from the government forever. This is absolutely true. If you stop paying your property tax, men with guns will eventually come and take your house. In the eyes of the system, your home is not an asset. It is a liability. It eats your cash flow. This brings us to rule number 2. Never hold dead assets. The elite do not buy mansions to sit empty. They do not buy raw land just to look at it. They buy productive assets. Their survival formula is simple. Yield is greater than inflation, plus taxes, plus maintenance. If an asset does not generate enough cash flow to pay its own rent to the government and outpace the devaluation of the currency, it is slowly killing you. Let's look at the aristocracy of old Europe or the land barons of America. They didn't just own land, they owned farmland. Why? Because the crops paid the property tax, the timber harvest paid the maintenance, the surplus fed the family. In 2026, you must apply this same logic. Do not just buy a house, buy a duplex where the tenant pays the tax bill. Do not just buy land, buy timberland, farmland, or property with mineral rights. If you hold a dead asset during a collapse, the tax burden will force you to sell it at the bottom of the market. But if you hold a productive asset, it pays for its own survival. The rule is non-negotiable. Your assets must feed you. If they eat your cash, they are not wealth, they are traps. Once you have secured assets that pay for themselves, you are ready for the most aggressive move in the playbook, using the destruction of the currency to your advantage. Most financial gurus will tell you to get out of all debt immediately. They are talking to the poor. They are protecting people who hold credit card debt and variable rate loans. But the elite play a different game. They understand a fundamental paradox. In an inflationary collapse, debt destroys the lender and enriches the borrower, but only if the interest rate is fixed. Let me introduce you to Hugo Stinnes. In 1922, while the German middle class was frantically saving their paper marks, Stinnes was doing the opposite. He borrowed massive amounts of German marks. He used that paper money to buy hard assets, coal mines, steel mills, and shipping lines. When hyperinflation hit in 1923, the value of his mines skyrocketed into the trillions. But the value of his debt? It remained fixed at the original nominal number. He paid off loans that were once worth millions of dollars with the equivalent of a few pennies. He effectively shorted the dying currency and went long on real value. He became the richest man in Germany while the country went bankrupt. This brings us to rule number 3, short the currency. In 2025, the modern version of the Hugo Stinnes strategy is the 30-year fixed-rate mortgage. If inflation runs at 10%, but your debt is locked in at 6%, the bank is effectively paying you 4% a year to hold that asset. You are paying them back with cheaper, debased dollars. However, there is a catch. This strategy is nitroglycerin. It is powerful, but it can blow up in your face. You must never use variable rate debt. If the Federal Reserve raises rates to fight inflation, variable debt will crush you, and you must ensure the asset produces cash flow to cover the payments until the inflation kicks in. The elite do not fear debt. They fear unproductive debt. They use fixed debt to let inflation pay off their assets for them. But what if we face the opposite scenario? What if, before the inflation spikes, we face a terrifying deflationary crash like 1929? For that, you need the most contrarian tool in the playbook. There is a scenario that is even more terrifying than hyperinflation: deflation. In a deflationary crash, the prices of assets do not go up, they collapse. The credit markets freeze. And in that environment, cash is king. Let me tell you about Joseph Kennedy. In 1928, while the rest of America was borrowing money to buy stocks at all-time highs, Kennedy did something strange. He sold. He sold everything. Legend says he knew it was time to exit when his shoeshine boy started giving him stock tips. Whether that is true or not, the math was undeniable. The market was in a bubble. When the crash hit in October 1929, the Dow Jones Industrial Average did not just fall, it disintegrated. Over the next 3 years, it lost 89% of its value. Most millionaires went bankrupt because they were fully invested and used leverage. Kennedy was sitting on a mountain of cash. And then he executed rule number 4, hold dry powder. He didn't just sit on the cash forever. He waited until the blood was in the streets. Then, he used his liquidity to buy up prime real estate and companies for pennies on the dollar. His fortune did not just survive the Great Depression. It exploded during it. In 2025, you must have dry powder. This does not mean keeping paper dollars under your mattress for 10 years. It means holding short-term U.S. Treasury bills. Right now, they pay you to wait. They are the most liquid asset on earth. If you are 100% invested in real estate or stocks, you are vulnerable. If the market crashes 50%, you are trapped. But if you hold 20 or 30% of your portfolio in liquid cash equivalents, a crash is not a tragedy. It is a shopping spree. You become the liquidity provider when everyone else is desperate to sell. That is how dynasties are built. So, we have covered hard assets, productive yield, fixed debt, and liquidity. But there is one final threat, a threat that can override all of these rules if you are not careful: your own government. The final rule is the most uncomfortable one for patriots to hear, but it is the one that saved the most lives in Germany in the 1930s and Russia in 1917. Rule number 5, jurisdictional arbitrage. This rule is based on a harsh reality. Your biggest risk is not the market, it is your own government. When a government faces bankruptcy, it becomes desperate. It imposes capital controls. It creates windfall taxes. It freezes bank accounts. We saw it in Cyprus in 2013. We saw it in Canada in 2022. We saw it in Argentina repeatedly. If your citizenship, your business, your bank accounts, and your physical body are all located in the same country, you have a single point of failure. If that government decides to lock the doors, you are trapped. The elite practice what is known as flag theory. They plant flags in different countries to maximize freedom. They hold a second passport as an insurance policy against political persecution. They bank in a stable jurisdiction like Singapore or Switzerland that respects privacy. They store their physical gold in private vaults outside the country they live in. This is not about evading taxes. It is about sovereign diversification. In 2026, you don't need to be a billionaire to do this. You can open an international bank account online. You can store gold overseas. You can acquire residency in tax-friendly nations. Why does this matter? Because in a collapse, options are freedom. Lack of options is prison. When the system tries to reset itself by confiscating wealth, the only wealth that is safe is the wealth they cannot reach. By applying these 5 rules, you have built a fortress. You have unconfiscatable assets, cash flow, inflation-hedged debt, liquidity, and political freedom. You do not need to guess what is coming. You just need to watch what the elite are doing. Right now, the signals are flashing red. Central banks bought over 1,000 tons of gold in 2023, near record highs. They are front-running the currency debasement. Corporate insiders, from Jeff Bezos to Mark Zuckerberg, have sold billions of dollars of their own stock. They are raising dry powder. And the tech billionaires are literally building bunkers in Hawaii and New Zealand. They are practicing jurisdictional arbitrage. They are executing the playbook. Now it is your turn. Here is your execution plan for 2026. Step 1. The ownership audit. Look at every asset you claim to own. If it relies on a bank, an exchange, or a third party to access, it is vulnerable. Move your crypto to cold storage. Take physical possession of some precious metals. Eliminate counterparty risk. Step 2. The debt fix. Look at your liabilities. If you have variable rate debt, you are exposed. Refinance it to a fixed rate immediately or pay it off. Do not let inflation dictate your monthly payments. Step 3. The liquidity target. Aim to have 20% of your portfolio in short-term liquid instruments. This is your ammunition. When the deleveraging event happens and assets go on sale for pennies on the dollar, this cash will be the foundation of your future dynasty. Step 4. The yield check. Ensure your real assets, whether it is a rental property or a side business, are cash flow positive. They must feed you through the storm. You do not need to predict the exact day the system breaks. You simply need to be positioned before the exit doors become too crowded. Because once the panic starts, liquidity disappears. And by then, it is too late to prepare. History is not random. It is a script, and we are currently reading the final pages of this chapter. The debt supercycle is ending. The currency reset is beginning. Most people will be paralyzed by fear. They will hold on to their paper assets until they burn. They will trust the system until it betrays them. But you now have the blueprint. You understand the fundamental law of finance. Wealth is never destroyed. It is only transferred. You now possess the 5 rules: unconfiscatable assets, productive yield, fixed debt, liquidity, and jurisdictional arbitrage. This is not just about survival. This is about positioning yourself for the greatest wealth transfer in human history. The choice is yours. You can ignore the pattern and become liquidity for the system, or you can execute the playbook and become the beneficiary. If you want to know exactly which jurisdictions are safest in 2026 and which specific assets the elite are quietly accumulating right now, subscribe to this channel. We will track the reset step by step. Don't be a victim. Be prepared.